Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to today's Friday Reflections on this Friday, the 11th of July, 2025. I hope you are well wherever you are tuning into this from. I wish you all a Jummah Mubarak or a very blessed Friday. Today, I would like to discuss with you this wonderful book I've discovered, Morality in the Qur'an by Shaykh Muhammad Abdallah Draz. Muhammad Abdallah Draz, as it says on the back, was a scholar between the years 1312 and 1377 Al Hijra, or 1894 and 1958 in the Western calendar. And he's often referred to as a teacher of teachers and is in a league of his own. He is one of the most important Islamic and Azari scholars of the past century. So I would like to share something that he discusses in this book in his introduction called Obligations about morality in the Quran. Obligation is the core of any robust moral doctrine. Without obligation, there is no responsibility. And without responsibility, there can be no recourse to justice. A moral rule cannot be conceived without obligation. Moral good is characterized by the imperative authority over everyone. Moral good is characterized by the imperative authority over everyone. Though this necessity is everyone is compelled to carry out the same order. Whatever the state of their actual feelings, a necessity which makes insubordination seem reprehensible. The Quran presents this necessity as amr, imperative, kitaba, prescription, and farida, duty. Sources of moral obligation. Moral obligation cannot result from the uncritical acceptance of social pressure or from an impassioned aspiration towards an ideal. And this is an important point he's already made. Moral obligation cannot result from the uncritical acceptance of social pressure. In other words, peer pressure. That just because a lot of people are saying something or a lot of people are heated about an issue, we cannot derive any moral authority from that. That's just people's passions, people's anger. Actually, people's passions and anger are things that we are supposed to control as Muslims. Instead, both of these forces must be processed by a conscience, through which they attain the approval and mark of individual reason. The Quran persistently the Quran persistently warns against the pursuit of impetuous desire and blind conformity. Both of these behaviors defy genuine morality and defeat its essential element of reason. Guarding against both these tendencies is imprinted in the primal structure of the human soul through instructions on what is good and what is evil. And there's a reference to the Quran here in the book in Surah 91, ayah 7 and 8. Thus, from the very beginning, human beings are endowed with moral awareness. Through this awareness, an individual is able to control their inclinations towards vice. Those who struggle to achieve self-control will be rewarded with paradise. In other words, those who work on developing self-control against their evil inclinations throughout their life, these are the ones that get paradise. The commandment of reason is therefore the only justified rule of conduct and legitimate authority. The Quran states, do they follow the command of their reason, or is it that they are an unjust people? This is in Surah Al-Jinn, Surah 72, Ayah 32. Human beings are both legislators and subjects. This duality is confirmed by the moral experience of remorse. Our failure to undertake our duties leads to feelings of inadequacy that ought to encourage us to adjust our behavior in order to return to our original sense of dignity. You know, we feel it when we do something wrong to someone. Even if we don't know technically, is it wrong in fiqh, jurisprudence, or is it wrong within the law of our country? We know. We all know it. And we feel that sense of remorse. Unless there's something seriously wrong with us, of course. But most normal people, they feel this. The Quran continually reawakens and reinstills within us the sense of our original dignity. God has dignified human beings, extended their dominion over land and seas, and favored them greatly over many we have created, and ordered the angels to prostrate themselves before the Father of mankind, a title of honor which the Quran frequently reminds us. Even if we choose to overlook the outer signs of human dignity and consider them from the point of view of their moral value, we find that the Quran considers human beings to be intrinsically good. The human being was created in the finest mold. Only those who do not believe and do not practice good works have an unsettled and unbalanced nature, and that fall lower than the lowest of creatures, or those who have a heart and do not think, eyes and do not see, ears and do not hear, and make themselves brute beasts or worse. It is thus a matter of free temporal choice. Everything resides in the good or bad use that we make of our superior faculties. Cultivating these faculties ennobles the soul. Forsaking them darkens it. The appeal to feelings in the Quran only occurs under the guidance of reason, which can assess the benefits and harms of acts and prioritize values. It therefore sensitizes us to certain feelings that are necessary for upholding the moral good, the moral order. Human kinship, for example, is presented as the principle upon which all social duties are based. In light of this, the slanderer is compared to someone who would like to eat his brother's dead flesh, adding that you would detest it. And by the way, underneath this, just for your reference, you can see here at the bottom of the book, here, there are footnotes. Each of these footnotes is referring to a verse in the Quran. So although he hasn't put these verses in quotation marks throughout this text, he is referring to the Quran. I'll just show Instagram as well, here at the bottom of the book. So this, everything here is from Quran. It's not something that Shaykh Muhammad Abdallah Draz is making up. The focus on reason, however, does not mean that we have the intellectual and emotional means to distinguish between all that is right and wrong. Human intelligence is not omnipotent and therefore is subject to fallibility, i.e., human beings, we make mistakes. We're not perfect. Beyond certain essential duties, acknowledged by every normal conscience, moral certainty must gradually give way to conjectures, hesitation, and aberrations. The diversity of human perspectives and infinite number of issues demonstrates that intelligence and feelings are necessary, but insufficient factors in the determination of moral behavior. To stop at these two factors then leads us to an unresolvable predicament of whose law ought to apply in any given situation. When considering morality, we must resort to a higher authority beyond society. Only God, the creator of the human soul, fully knows the laws of its advancement and success. It may be that you hate something when it is good for you, and it may be that you love something when it is bad for you. And Allah knows, and you do not know. This is in Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 216. Recourse to divine reason is therefore a necessity. Only revealed light can assist innate light. Only divine law can continue and complete natural moral law. The believer thus has two sources of illumination, whereas the unbeliever has only one. So the believer obviously has recourse to divine revelation. This is an additional source of inspiration and instruction, in addition to what secular society has. It is important to recognize that this does not translate into two separate sources of moral obligation, but rather one with two tiers. It is our reason which enables us to heed divine reason. So if we have no sense of reason ourselves, we cannot understand the divine reason which is revealed in the Qur'an. And if we have that reason, we already have kind of reflection of the divine reason in some more limited capacity that human beings encompass. The suggestions given by our conscience only have moral worth to the extent that we believe them to represent moral truth, and not emotional impulses, no matter how serious. All our efforts of reflection have the aim of deciphering the truth, which is innately imprinted within us. In essence, the autonomy that is attributed to our reason means that we are our own legislators. This, however, does not mean that reason is the authority of the law, since that would allow it to change the law as it pleased. The inability to do precisely this means that the law is pre-established and embedded within each individual in such a way that it cannot be erased. To listen to reason is to listen to God's voice, whether or not we acknowledge it as such. This is an important point. What Shaykh Muhammad Abdallah Draz is saying here is that within each of us, we have an innate sense of reason, an innate sense of right and wrong. You can call it a moral compass. Some people call it a conscience. Each one of us has this. And again, unless somebody's got something very seriously wrong with them, in general, human beings have this. And so to listen to this, the Sheikh is saying, is actually to listen to God's voice. Whether we realize we're listening to God's voice or not, if we have this innate sense of right and wrong, we know we don't kill each other. That's wrong, that's evil. We have that sense. Almost everyone has that, irrespective of what their religion is, what society they come from. People know killing other people is evil. People know that stealing from each other is wrong. Even if they do it, they know they've done wrong. People have this innate sense. And what the Sheikh is saying is that is something that Allah has imprinted upon every soul. And every soul that is aware of that is actually listening to God's voice, at least in that capacity. Natural and revealed light emanate from a single source. It is always God who specifies our duty. God is the only legislator in this sense. The Quran is the primary and ultimate source for understanding of God's will. Even so, it does not present divine commandment as an absolute power, but rather provides justifications for its rules. Thus, to make amends with our neighbors is supported by the maxim, reconciliation is better. Reconciliation is better. And this, is in the Quran in Surah 4, Ayah 128. Likewise, to practice fair trade is justified with the statement that is beneficial and gives the best result, which is in the Holy Quran in Surah 17, Ayah 35. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of subtitles here, and all of these footnotes that are in the book are making reference to ayahs of the Quran that back up what is in the text. When asking men to lower their gaze and to master their senses, the Quran tells us that is purer for them, and so on. The intrinsic value of moral action remains the essence of duty. Rules are justified through values in an appeal to human reason. It is therefore in the notion of value that the true source of obligation resides, the essence of what is just and good. However, can only ever be partially detected with human capabilities. The believer resorts to divine reason to direct them towards perfect morality. What the Sheikh is saying here is within many societies, including within secular societies, there is this sense of justice. But actually, if we understand Islam properly, deeply. We understand what he's calling us to. We should actually be moving towards perfect morality, which is on a higher order than what is generally the case within most societies. That's a very interesting point that the Sheikh makes, because I think if we're honest with ourselves, we know that's not necessarily the true of a lot of Muslim communities. So if this be the case, at least in those communities, we're obviously missing something. The characteristics of moral obligation. Moral law, like all other types of law, must be, by definition, applicable universally. The Quran addresses all of humanity. As it is applied to oneself, it is applied to others, to one's kin, as to strangers, to the rich, as it is to the poor, outside of the community, as it is inside, whether it concerns a friend or an enemy. Universality is not only expressed in terms of the extent of coverage, but also as it applies to diversity of circumstances that each individual inevitably faces. Given these natural states, each duty is only commanded to the furthest practical extent, without yielding to subjective states or personal interests. The Quran reveals that cynics only obey the law to the extent that they profit from conformance, while believers accept it unconditionally. So here there's a difference between people who are cynics, people who they obey the law just so they don't get into trouble. That is the bare minimum. That's not the status of the believer. The believer is the one who accepts it unconditionally. The believer does it because it's pleasing to Allah. The believer does it because he knows it's for the best, to be kind and just, a decent neighbor, not taking anybody's rights. So a believer should actually be a better human being in all respects. And when I say a better human being, I mean someone that anybody from any culture, any religion, any society would recognize as a better human being. So if a Muslim is not seen in that sense, and in fact, in some cases, is seen as much, much worse, then we are clearly not following this. In light of this, values such as generosity are commended in times of ease and hardship, and courage is expected to brave hunger, thirst, and fatigue. Those who shun generosity and valor on account of fear of life's hardships are reprimanded in the Quran. Again, this is a universal principle. People who lack courage, who, will not do the right thing out of fear of life's hardships, fear of difficulties, fear of criticism. These people are never respected in any society, in any religion, in any community. But people who do the right thing, even though it's difficult, maybe they protect their neighbors of a different religion that's not their religion when they come under attack. Maybe when they come under attack by people of the same religion as them. That shows moral courage. This is the type of person that the Quran commends and supports and praises, irrespective of their religion, because it is based upon principles. It's not based upon the label of the person or what they claim to be following, but what type of a human being they actually are. This is the important point. True believers have no choice when divine law is decreed. Moral law supposes freedom of choice regarding a respect or violation of the law. Choice is de facto, not de jure, since the law has been established. The Quran consistently stresses this point for the duty of faith as well as practical virtue. Moral obligation thus imposes itself on the will is something which must be. In other words, it acts on our conscience, not people who are just doing things that they think or they've been told are in the Quran. but people who do the right thing, that is universally recognized as the right thing by any decent people. Yeah, exactly. As someone's just commented on my Instagram, we do things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. It's actually a quote of President John F. Kennedy, but it's true. Do the right things, do good things, not because they're easy, but because they're hard. Do it because it's a challenge. What good is life if there's no challenge in it? What will you feel you've achieved? The Quran consistently stresses this point for the duty of faith as well as practical virtue. Moral obligation thus imposes itself on the will as something that must be. In other words, it acts on our conscience. Free and voluntary agents must perceive the value of duty as worthy of attainment. The freedom to choose gives us feelings of power, while its consequences entails subordination or duty. These are the characteristics of all laws. Moral law requires action for its own sake because of its inherent value. You know, if something's really a good thing, you don't usually need to convince people that it's a good thing. People in their heart know, even if there's massive social pressure against it, people know. People know in the depth of their soul and in their heart what is right. We don't need to be a scholar of Islam or a scholar of any religion or the legal system to know that. You know, beating people up or hurting people or taking their rights away from them or harming anyone is wrong. Most people know that, unless they've got something seriously wrong with them. People in this is what the Sheikh said, because of its inherent value. People know that inherent value. An action must be obligatory or good in itself without regard for consequence. From the legislative perspective, the Quran's approach to ethics is progressive. The legislator can justify his orders, but this is not strictly a moral role. It is performed to educate using a form of gradualism that may be effective for beginners. Morality, however, becomes self supporting as learning advances. So the more we learn, the more we understand, it actually increases our sense of morality, our sense of obligation, our sense of duty. From the practical perspective, moral action consists of physical deeds that must always be conscious, voluntary, and intentional, not forced, conscious, voluntary, and intentional, because we understand what we're doing and understand it's the right thing to do. In other words, morality requires an underlying spirit. An action that does not conform to these characteristics may be legal, but it does not hold moral authority. And we all sense that, if there's an unjust law, we have to obey it, but none of us feel good about it because we know it's unjust. Whereas if it's a just law, no one feels bad about following it. And even if somebody's done something wrong and gets caught, they feel, okay, fair deal, I did wrong. And they know it's wrong. People have that sense. The law of duty is characterized by the fact that it is a law of freedom and reason, of intrinsic value, and is essentially spiritual in its activity. The practice of moral law is thus conditioned by human nature, the realities of life, and the hierarchy of action. Possibility of action is a fundamental condition of moral obligation. The Quran states, Allah does not oblige any soul except to the extent that He has given it. Surah Al-Talaq, Surah 65, Ayah 7. And we do not oblige any soul beyond its capacity. Surah Al-An'am, which is Surah 6, Ayah 152, and also in Surah Al-Mu'minun, Surah 23, Ayah 62. And Allah does not oblige any soul beyond its capacity, which is in Surah Al-Baqarah, Ayah 286. Those states of the soul that do not submit to the will are not objects of moral obligation. Emotional and involuntary states, however, can be acquired through voluntary actions. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Forgive one another or shake hands, and your resentments will disappear. Exchange presents so as to foster mutual friendship." So this is practical advice from the Prophet, peace be upon him, that when you have a dispute with someone, then you try to overcome that dispute and then shake hands, exchange gifts, try to foster a good relationship instead of animosity. These are voluntary actions that give rise to love. In contrast, the Prophet also cautioned against the consequences of anger. He said, "Do not become irritated or angry to avoid the outcomes of these behaviors." To ward off anger, the Prophet suggested the performance of ablution, i.e., using water to soothe emotions and calm down. Even in English, we sometimes say go and take a cold shower. He also recommended changing the body posture because emotions and other involuntary states can be subject to our power of action and rational calculations, albeit indirectly. To cause or avoid them, they remain within the realm of obligation. All impossible acts are eliminated as these do not accord with divine justice and wisdom. Very practical advice there from the Prophet, peace be upon him, about the danger of anger. And why is anger dangerous? Sorry, because when you get angry, you are no longer acting rationally. You might do anything when you're in that state, which is why the Prophet ﷺ cautioned us to watch our emotional state. And if we become angry, to walk away from that situation if we can, and to, as we say in English, go and take a cold shower, go and do wudu, or ghusl. Calm yourself down with water. Gentle practice. Far from demanding the impossible, Islamic ethics tend towards ease and endurance. In this regard, the Qur'an states, "Allah desires ease for you. He does not desire difficulty for you." Surah Al-Baqarah, Ayah 185. "And He has chosen you and not placed any discomfiture in your religion." Surah Al-Hajj, that's Surah 22, Ayah 78. "And Allah desires to lighten matters for you, and man was created weak." Surah Al-Nisa, which is Surah 4, Ayah 28. And we have not sent you except as a mercy to the world. Rahmatan lil Alameen. Surah Al-Anbiya, which is Surah 21, Ayah 107. Thus, our capacity to bear what is demanded of us is a hallmark of Islamic ethics. This is why we are warned against excessiveness, even in acts of piety, where the conditions of our lives may limit our abilities. Life circumstances may affect consistency and in some cases present insurmountable challenges, even when it is our ardent desire to undertake certain acts. Each individual must also tend to their own needs and those of others in the course of their daily lives, which may also impact the time available for pure acts of worship. These exigencies emerge as a blessing since they prevent believers from performing acts mechanically. See, we're not supposed to perform the acts mechanically. We're supposed to have our heart in it. Every act of worship must be performed with reflection. Also, acts must not become so tiresome or burdensome that they no longer serve to elevate the spirit. This risks abandonment altogether. Gentleness does not change the structure of action, but rather its timing. To voluntarily stop or spread acts over a reasonable duration of time ensures longevity of performance. It is clear that duty in the Islamic moral order is conditioned by circumstances, since normal conditions are not always the norm. Mercy demands appropriate modifications when the circumstances of life change. The changes to duty can be temporary or permanent, general or specific, complete or partial, regarding both actions and people. Gentleness is also prescribed when changing a bad habit. Thus, the prohibition of alcohol was effected in 4 stages. The first stage establishes the good that God provided through the fruit of the date palm and the grapevine. followed immediately by the possible derivation of intoxicants and wholesome provision. The existence of a potential harm does not negate the value and use of the original good. In the second stage, the Quran tells us that the harm of alcohol and games of chance is greater than its benefit, thereby raising awareness of the nature of both acts without making a definitive statement. In the third stage, believers are exhorted to avoid prayer when they are in a state of intoxication. With obligatory prayers occurring 5 times a day and spread over the course of our waking hours, drinking becomes even more challenging and less likely. Finally, an ultimate prohibition is instituted when the Quran states that intoxicants and gambling are idolatrous practices and must be abandoned by believers who wish to prosper. Gradualism and progressivism are the Islamic approach to changing harmful habits. In other words, the Prophet Muhammad and the revelation in the Quran did not immediately ban these things and expect a person who was previously drinking and gambling and doing all of these things to suddenly give all of that up. Because it takes time to change bad habits. Quran recognizes them. Allah, of course, recognizes that because Allah knows us better than we know ourselves. And the Prophet Muhammad recognized that because he was the best of us. So who are these people today who try to expect people to just change overnight and act like saints? When even the people who are doing that kind of criticism, they do not act like saints themselves because, of course, it takes a lot of work. You don't get there overnight. The Quran itself was revealed over roughly 2 periods lasting about a decade each. In the first span, principles and general rules of behavior were established. In the second, practical rules and application were the focus. New duties were separated by significant intervals, allowing individuals and the emerging community to internalize and adjust to the Islamic moral code. This legislative wisdom of gradualism is justified as follows. In the Holy Quran, Allah says, "It is so that we may secure your heart by it." Al-Furqan, which is Surah 25, Ayah 32. And it is a Quran which we have portioned so that you can recite it to people in stages. Surah Al-Isra, Surah 17, Ayah 16. This approach is particularly relevant in the political arena where decisions impact the public at large. Truthful yet unpopular decisions have a greater possibility of wholesale rejection if they are introduced instantaneously and comprehensively. You have to give people time to adjust, time to change. Quran recognized this. It gradually moves towards better morality, better ethics, allowing us to grow into becoming better human beings. And we should understand this when we are living our lives by the Quran ourselves. Every single one of us has had bad habits or still has bad habits, still has weaknesses, still has things that we're not very good at that we're supposed to be doing, still has things that we're not supposed to be doing that we're maybe a bit too good at. Quran gives us time to change, encourages us to take steps in that right direction, doesn't expect us to change overnight. Quran doesn't condemn people who are moving in the right direction and trying their best. So many interesting things that we've discussed here. Maybe I'll return to this book next time because I think it's a very interesting book. And this is much needed advice for people in this time, and advice that comes straight from the Quran with a good interpretation by one of the best scholars of the past century. I wish you all a wonderful evening if you're in the UK. Wherever you are, have a wonderful and blessed weekend. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. May the peace and blessings of God be with you all.